buddy, Saturday afternoon, and I'm sure you guys are used to Ben Rossa introducing the show, but Ben isn't here. He is going to what Matt Gajewski has told me is one of the best college football games of the year. We've got Ben's girlfriend has never seen a football game in her entire life, so Ben has brought her to, which game is it, Matt? Which game has he brought her to?
Army versus UMass.
All right, so she's certain to be a football fan after this. So Ben has gone with his girlfriend to the Army and UMass game. And he had said to me, well, we don't have anybody else who does college football. And I told him, I sure shit can't do college football either, but I know Matt Gajewski can, and he could carry the load for me. So I'm sitting in for Ben. I am going to be leaning very heavily on my friend Matt here to give us all the college football analysis. If you guys haven't checked out our college football package, which is powered by Matt Gajewski and his big brain of football information, sign up using the link we have below, because everything from our player projections to Matt's matchup sheet is included in our college football package. And it is the most valuable college football resource that you guys will find anywhere. And it's what's going to help us really navigate this slate and some of the information, all the games that we're about to go to. Free show here. All we ask from you guys is to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We got a bunch of games. So let's get right into it, Matt, starting with FSU taking on Wake Forest. I have run lineups for the slate, so I have some idea of what it is that I think that your projections are liking. And at least from this game, the only thing that I am really seeing pop up meaningfully is some FSU stacks with Jordan Travis at quarterback. I did get to 14% of them. Do you like Jordan Travis? And who do you like stacking him with, if anybody?
Yeah, I like Jordan Travis. I think this is mainly a product of the Florida State team total. Travis is generally a quarterback I love playing in tournaments. When he's pushed by opponents like this, he has an absolute nuclear ceiling, but he is kind of reliant on that. So the 20.5 point spread should make you a little nervous with Travis. I mean, that's why he's not among the most owned quarterbacks on the slate. But we did get a little late news. Johnny Wilson's not going to play in this game. Targets should consolidate in this pass game to Keon Coleman and Jaheim Bell. Two different price points. So if you need a cheap guy, Jaheim Bell definitely there. They're high-powered tight end. He actually gets carries in the run game too, which is wild for a player like this. But he's the cheap option. Keon Coleman should dominate targets today. And unfortunately, they rotated receivers the last time Johnny Wilson was out, so this doesn't really open up any additional value. I think you probably see some combination of like Destin Hill and Ja'Kai Douglas, Deuce Spahn, Kentron Poitier. They'll use a lot of guys to fill that void. But the stack I do think is live. Wake Forest defense doesn't scare you. And it's kind of nice now with the condensed target share. That's mainly where I'm looking, and I do have plenty of these stacks.
Yep, and I did get to some of Jaheim Bell when I was running lineups as a value receiver. He is the stacking combination I get to the most with Travis. And with you saying that Johnny Wilson's out, we're going to have some more condensed targets. So $4,200, that does seem to make sense to me that Bell would stand out as a value option for that reason. On the other side of the game, anything to like here from Wake Forest?
Wake Forest is really tricky to get to. We don't have clarity on their quarterback situation. I don't really think it matters. You're not playing a Wake Forest quarterback anyway. But what it does is take out the receivers. If we have third stringer Santino Mariucci playing, that would be an absolute disaster for this pass game. And they haven't been consistent. Through the first 5 or so games of the year, we actually did have locked in routes for these players. But Wake Forest has been so bad. They're messing up their rotations. Wide receiver 1, Jamal Banks, saw his routes cut from 94% to 56% last week. So you no longer even have clarity on who is going to be running routes for Wake Forest. I think it makes for a pretty tricky situation. In the backfield, it's going to be a committee. At best, we'll see 2 guys. At worst, they'll involve a guy like Tate Carney. So Damon Claiborne, Justice Ellison, I think there's just better places for value. If you're running Florida State stacks, I don't think you need a Wake Forest run back.
All right, let's move on to the next game then, where we have Houston taking on KSU, and fairly high total in this game. It is 60 points, and also we got KSU favored by 17.5. Some college football fun fact that I could bring to the table here, Matt. When I was in college, my roommate, well, one of my roommates, his cousin was the starting quarterback at Houston during the time there. So we used to occasionally road trip all the way from Elon, North Carolina, down to Houston to go watch some college football with his cousin as the starting quarterback. But for this game slate, that's like the depth of my college football knowledge, is that I've been to Houston games to watch somebody who I didn't really know but was kind of connected to play quarterback. That aside, is there anything that stands out to you from this game? The one player that I'm getting exposure to is Trayshawn Ward at running back.
It's a good game. And Unfortunately, it's hard to target for DFS with a lopsided spread. Houston runs an air raid, so I think we have interest in a few of these guys. Donovan Smith would be a really contrarian play on this slate, but he is averaging 38 attempts per game. Kansas State's pass defense can be got. They lost 2 NFL corners. It's just you're taking on a 22 implied team total with Houston when you stack Donovan Smith. So price adjusted, I think there's better alternatives. If you're playing something like the big flagship GPP, I think you could do this. They also ruled out Joseph Manjack, their wide receiver 2. We should see Samuel Brown and Matthew Golden handle more targets today. And I think they likely rotate their wide receiver 3. My favorite bet, if you're trying to find the player that would benefit from the Manjack injury, is Stephon Johnson, but they'll also use Dalton Carnes a little bit too. So it's tricky with these players. Last time they lost one of these guys, it was Matthew Golden going down. Johnson was the main beneficiary. So that's where I'm playing a little bit of just a one-off or, a skinny stack between a Trayshawn Ward on the other side. The problem with Kansas State and why they're really hard to target, despite having a 39 team total, they've been splitting quarterbacks. And they've both been awesome, so I can't really fault them for that. Avery Johnson's one of the highest recruits in program history, electric freshman. If this guy ever got full run in a game, he would absolutely break a slate. 16 designed attempts in the last 2 games. Both those games, he played about 50% of the snaps. So you can clearly see just nuclear upside for this guy, averaging over 6 yards per carry. I'm actually going to sprinkle him in the off chance that Kansas commits to a quarterback, Kansas State that is. But yeah, it's pretty difficult to stack him because their offense devolves into this really run-heavy quarterback option type system when he's playing. So a little less interest in Brooks, Sano, Garcia, Jackson, the receivers. A little more interest in the run game. And you mentioned Ward. I think he's completely fine. Middling price point. They will run a committee to some degree, and it has ebbed and flowed with the hot hand between Ward and Giddens, but lately it's been Ward handling a lot of opportunity. He outcarried Giddens 15-9 last game. Should find plenty of efficiency against a bad Houston run defense.
Yeah, 5,800 price tag there on Ward. We've got a super chat as well. If you guys have any questions for us in the Discord channel, at me, we could answer some of those questions over the course of the show too. One of the benefits of having a Stochastic membership is that you get access to that Discord channel and you can tag us and ask questions, whatever you would like. But a super chat here from Dean Krause, and Dean is asking us either Bell or Coleman in cash ? And then Bell over Delp now. So starting with the first part here, Matt, would you play either Bell or Coleman in cash today?
I wouldn't. Bell is close though, so that 2v2 is interesting. I prefer Delp. Salary is a little tight. There are a couple value plays, but I don't think you feel awesome about them. If you have the extra 600, or I think it's 800 that separates Bell and Delp, yeah, I have no problem getting to Bell, but I think that salary does go somewhere. So I'm going to side with the Delp side.
Yeah, and that was the other part which you already answered, the Bell over Delp. So Dean, thank you very much for the super chat. We do appreciate it and hope that helps you make some money today. Next game to talk about here is Oklahoma, Kansas, and Matt, building lineups. This is a game that I get a ton of exposure to, a bunch of players that are showing up in lineups. The total is really high for this game. We're looking at 66.5 points. The spread is only about a touchdown. So game that should be competitive and should be really high scoring. Is this a game you like getting to today?
Sorry, I was rebuilding something. Which game is this?
Oh, the Oklahoma, Kansas game.
Oh, yeah.
Really high total. Close spread. So it's a game where when I'm looking at the exposures lineups I built, this is one of my most exposed games. Lots of game stacks here based on your smirk when I brought that game up. Seems like it's a game you like as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Going to be owned, so navigate it carefully. Dylan Gabriel will be the highest owned signal caller on the slate in my estimation. For good reason, he's just the best play. If you're running cash lineups, small field tournaments, anything with a limited field size, he should be in your lineup. He's running more than he ever has in his career. We've seen Gabriel for a long time now. He has 30 designed rush attempts over the last 4 games, which is absolutely bananas for a guy who's so good as a pocket passer. He has an awesome floor now with the extra run equity he's getting. He already has 230 cumulative yards, and then through the air, he's averaging over 300. Volume's good. Kansas's defense doesn't scare you. He's locked in as the best overall quarterback on the slate, and there's enough values where I think you just want to prioritize him. He's also pretty easy to stack now that we lost Andrew Anthony for the year. So we've seen these Oklahoma players trickle up in price, but they're still not efficient. You can get the replacement Nick Anderson at 5,800, played almost every single snap, locked in route share. He's coming off a 2-touchdown, 100-yard game on 9 targets. And he offers something that Drake Stoops and Jaleel Farouk don't, and it's explosiveness downfield. Stoops is basically your underneath slot receiver. I mean, the guy is probably going to see like 9 targets, but the chance he eclipses like 60 yards is low. Farouk has a little more explosiveness to his game, but he's trailed in targets. Even with Nick Anderson being a rotational receiver this year, he is barely ahead of him in receiving yards. So I would still try to get Nick Anderson if you can. He's the cheapest, so it shouldn't be a problem. Outside of that, the only other player I usually mention is their tight end, Austin Stogner. He plays a ton, but he only has 11 targets. On this slate, I don't necessarily think you need to get to him. Last thing on Oklahoma is the backfield. They basically have a new lead back every single week. I don't have any confidence in who is getting the carries, and they return Tawi Walker from suspension, which adds another body to an already crowded room. So I'll pass on the running backs and just stick with the receivers and Gabriel.
Yeah, and looking at the exposures I got to, which I mean, it's based on Matt's projections. I don't know anything for myself. I'm very reliant on my friend Matt here. So a lot of what I have to say is just going to be, I ran lineups. These are the exposures I got to, and it's generally going to be in line with the information that Matt has because he's powering these projections. But Gabriel, my most rostered quarterback on the slate, I have double-digit exposure to Farouk, to Stoops, to Nick Anderson. Of those 3, I got to Anderson the most. He projects about comparably to the other 2 in Matt's projections, but he's also cheaper, which makes him stand out a little bit more. On the other side of the game, when it comes to Kansas, I know that we're really focusing here more on the Oklahoma side. You mentioned Gabriel likely to be the most rostered quarterback on the slate, also being the case for me in my lineups. Is there anything you like as runbacks from the Kansas side?
I do like Kansas. People fear Oklahoma's defense, and they're definitely improved from last year. But we've seen them beaten twice now, not actually like losing games, but players that have had production against them. John Rice Plumlee for UCF and Texas got them too. Oklahoma ended up with wins in both of those games, but we've now seen quarterbacks have success against Oklahoma. Jason Bean isn't a drop-off from Jalen Daniels. All the efficiency metrics, going back 2 years now, not much separates these guys, and Bean actually has better mobility. And this Kansas offense does morph a little bit with Bean under center. They do go a little bit run heavier. With him, I don't think you need a stack. He's certainly live as just we've got the super flex in college football. So you want to use a quarterback run back. Bean definitely fits that mold. Really good rushing equity. And the other problem with stacking Bean is that they run a rotation at receiver. Lawrence Arnold, Luke Grimm, Quentin Skinner, they're playing less than last year. Players like Trevor Wilson, they're using 2 tight ends sometimes. These cheap guys, these ancillary guys are getting on the field more than they ever have, which is a problem for a run-heavy, slow offense quarterbacked by Bean. In the backfield, I think you can play a contrarian, Devin Neal. He's a bit expensive, so I actually prefer him on FanDuel if you're going to do this. But when games are competitive, we do see carries separate between him and Daniel Highshaw. They just haven't been in as many competitive games recently. Last time out, they got down, but 13 carries still to Highshaw's 8. And Neal operates as the pass catcher, so I would get to him as a sprinkle in tournaments and maybe as a run back if you're stacking this Oklahoma team.
All right, let's move on to the next one. If you guys haven't done it yet, do us that favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Next game to talk about, it is WVU at UCF. And this is another game, Matt, that I ended up getting a pretty good amount of exposure to. Another game with a high total, also expect to be relatively competitive, spread of a touchdown. The total is about 60 points. So, I mean, guys like RJ Harvey, one of my most rostered running backs that I got to here. In addition, I'm getting to John Rice Plumlee at quarterback, Javon Baker at wide receiver, all from the UCF side. Is this a team that you really like getting to? Because it's one that pops up a ton running your projections.
Yeah, love UCF. Really fast team, 29th in pace, favored here, good team total. Plumlee is one of the premier dual threats in the country. We just haven't seen him a lot due to injury, but came back last week, decimated Oklahoma, 90 yards rushing, a score there. I mean, he was efficient through the air. Plumlee's an awesome play. He's too cheap. I think if I'm running a cash lineup, I'm starting with Plumlee and Gabriel and making it work from there. He's easy to stack too. They basically have a locked-in 2 wide receiver set with Javon Baker and Kobe Hudson. I'm not worried about Hudson's recent target share. We've seen him going back years now. He'll be fine. Big games will be down the road for him. Xavier Townsend, their wide receiver 3, he's also in play, but I would rather just find the salary to get to Baker or Hudson. Then you mentioned Harvey in the run game. Like, this guy's had a monster opportunity share of late, really separating from Johnny Richardson, good in the pass game, has over 20 carries in 2 of the last 3 games. favored here, so this should be no issues for RJ Harvey. I'm still going to limit Plumlee and Harvey in lineups together. I don't want to play them with how much rushing equity Plumlee can soak up. But yeah, I would be playing some of these UCF guys. They're awesome plays on this slate.
And then on the other game, how much do you like Garrett Green in the super flex spot? Because he's another quarterback I'm getting exposure to. Actually, my third most rostered QB on the entire slate. And some of it also has to do with how I set up rules in Fantasy Cruncher and build out lineups. But I have Gabriel as my most rostered quarterback, followed by Plumlee and then Garrett Green. So added correlation by getting these two quarterbacks from the same game in the same lineup. Is that a lineup construction that you like for today's slate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can full game stack this. Garrett Green's like Bean, where you don't need to stack him. So if you have, a Plumlee to Javon Baker stack and you're looking for a run back, you could just use Green in the super flex and I'd be okay with it. He's another player with amazing mobility, and this West Virginia offense uses him as the engine. He has 349 rush yards already, and he's missed the better part of 2 games. So just ridiculous volume on the ground for Green. He has 20 designed attempts over the last 2 games, doesn't even include scrambles. Offensive line has kept him really clean. He's only taken 3 sacks all year. It's a great offensive line he's playing behind. So the risk of negative rushing yards isn't really here for Green. And then as a passer, we have seen him be efficient. They don't like playing this way, but when they need to, as a passer, he's averaging over 9 yards per attempt. He does have a 300-yard game under his belt, which we've never seen from him in the past. He kind of needs to be coaxed into that. But as a touchdown underdog against a UCF defense, which doesn't scare you that much either, I think you could certainly play him. As for a stack, this isn't something I really like doing. One thing that would help you if you're forcing it in, they lost Hudson Clement. So I think their 3 wide receiver sets going to be Devin Carter, Preston Fox, and Traylon Ray. Ray in particular is cheap, so I think you could get to him. He only has 12 targets this year, but again, he's been playing behind Clement. What's he really going to do as a rotational wide receiver 4? The last thing for West Virginia, which I think is probably the most fragile projection situation we have today, is CJ Donaldson versus Justin Johnson. So Donaldson's been the lead back really the whole year, and he's been bad. Last week, they gave Justin Johnson 14 carries to Donaldson's 13, and Justin Johnson just ran laps around him. Very tricky situation to project, but if you think this split continues or Justin Johnson's moved ahead, he's a player I would artificially boost, and that's something that I did. I'm not going to get crazy with Justin Johnson or anything, but he's 3,900. This team has a massive run rate. They're only passing 37% of the time, and he's just flat out been better. So you could see him end up somewhere between 15 and 20 carries, and for 3,900, that's an incredible value. Rumor is coming from Twitter that he's going to start today. So you're starting to get some of these little tidbits and tea leaves suggesting that he's going to handle more work too. I'm going to play Justin Johnson in maybe 10 to 15% of my lineups, trying to just force him in somewhere in there.
Nice. Yeah, definitely a game, like I said, one that I'm getting a lot of exposure to, makes a whole lot of sense as game stacks. And in general, a lot of the games we talked about so far, some of the spots that I'm getting the most exposure to, which does make it an interesting start to the show here. Moving on with the next game, although first, I want to tell you guys about Prize Picks. They're sponsoring the show today. When you sign up at Prize Picks using the link we have below, you do get 1 free month of Odd Shopper Premium, which, Matt, I cannot advocate more for Odd Shopper Premium. I've been posting some of my betting results on Twitter, and there are sports like basketball that I do know a lot about, but then there are other sports like college football that I've had success betting this year. I don't know anything about college football. I just follow some of the advice on Odd Shopper. It's just, oh, all right, we've got this guy projected with a 6% ROI on over 56.5 receiving yards. I just blindly follow the data. It's been profitable for me this year. So one of the benefits when you sign up at Prize Picks, you're going to get 1 free month of Odd Shopper. And also something else, you're going to get $100 bonus on your first deposit. So you're going to get some free money when you sign up at Prize Picks. You're going to get access to Odd Shopper. And if you're already at Prize Picks, here's another site that I think you guys should be considering, Sleeper. They have an over-under today. It's a total free square. Kyle McCord over 0.5 passing yards. I haven't looked too deep at your projections, Matt, but is it fair to say you have more than 0.5 passing yards projected for Kyle McCord?
That would be correct. You need to take these free squares.
Free square. So guys, if you're just looking to make some free money today, sign up at Sleeper using that link below. play Kyle McCord over 0.5 passing yards. You're also getting a deposit bonus of up to $100 when you sign up at Sleeper using the link that we have below. So go take advantage of that Kyle McCord over 0.5 passing yards, because those are some of the easiest opportunities you will find to make money when you're playing props or betting on any sort of sport at all. So let's move on to the next game, where we have Texas A&M taking on South Carolina. And this is another game, Matt, that I get a good amount of exposure to. But what really stands out to me, Le'Veon Moss is one of my most rostered players on the entire slate. Running back, at least in my time that I've played college football, has been one of the harder positions to really get guaranteed projection out of. But we're projecting Moss really well. He's showing up in the majority of my lineups. How do you rate him relative to all the other running backs on the slate? Because he seems to be a very high priority.
Yeah, he's great. And pricing mainly does this. He's about $1K too cheap at $5,200. This team started the year as a three-way committee, and they completely iced Amari Daniels. He's had some fumbling problems, and he seems to be out of the rotation. He didn't even play a snap last week. So it's been reduced to two players, and Le'Veon Moss has really asserted himself. He's become the full-time pass-catching back. He has at least 19 touches in 2 of the last 3 games. He hasn't fallen below 17 in any of those contests. Matchup here is right. It's probably the easiest game Texas A&M will play the rest of the way. So I think we might even have a situation where this team playing in the gauntlet that is the SEC West, Le'Veon Moss has a ceiling for higher touches in a game where they're favored by 17 points, totals 51. South Carolina's defense is one of the worst in the conference. He could absolutely smash this matchup. And at 5,200, what does he really even have to do for you? Workload should be on par with some of the elite backs on the slate. Like him a ton.
Yeah, I'm looking through, actually, not just running back. I have Moss is the most roster I got at any position across all my lineups. So Le'Veon Moss does look like a pretty strong play in Matt's projections. And then there's some other players also from A&M that are making it into my lineups. Max Johnson at quarterback, and then stacking him as well with Evan Stewart at wide receiver. What do you like from the passing game from A&M?
Yeah, honestly, a lot of this analysis that we talked about with Moss can kind of be applied to all of Texas A&M. They're underpriced after getting clobbered in the SEC West, and players like Evan Stewart have dealt with injury, so their prices are really depressed. We now saw Stewart return, play a full-time role, and he's coming off 11 targets. This is basically what we saw all last year with him. So it's not like he's some freshman or something that had a blip on the radar, 111 target game. He's been a monster through 2 years now. Really underpriced. Max Johnson's definitely not a guy you feel good about, but he's also too cheap at 6,500. He runs a little bit. His passing efficiency is definitely not that of Wegman, but this is also the easiest matchup he's had by far since he took over as the starter. This South Carolina defense is a bottom 30 passing unit in the country. They're allowing 8.6 yards per attempt. Really, it's just how do you think Texas A&M beats this South Carolina team? Because they should rack up a ton of points today. What I'll say is Johnson in the passing game should be under-owned compared to Moss. So if you're playing those large flagship tournaments, this could be a leverage point for you just directly in the same offense.
And then are you okay with having lineups that have Max Johnson with Le'Veon Moss, or would you prefer to get some of the leverage and go with like a Johnson Stewart stack?
On this particular slate, I think there's quite a bit of opportunity cost with some of the monster totals we have. So I'm trying not to do that, but I didn't make a rule setting that as something that wouldn't happen in my lineups. But I went through them. I did not have any Johnson Moss pop up together.
Okay, makes sense to me. And then on the other side of the game, is there anything that stands out to you from the South Carolina side of the game?
Man, Rattler's been a tricky point for me all year. He's playing behind one of the worst offensive lines. All of his receivers are hurt. They lost Amari and Brown again. They haven't had Antwain Wells the entire season, really. He's barely played. Xavier Legette got banged up in their last game. It looks like he's going to give it a go today. But you have a less than 100% receiving core for Rattler playing behind a horrific offensive line. It's probably the biggest offensive line, defensive line mismatch on the entire slate. But Rattler's been in this situation before and he's played well. Somehow he has 114 rushing yards despite taking 30 sacks already. It like can't compute for me how good Rattler's been in a terrible situation. With that said, their team total's low at 17 points. Rattler at 7,300 is more expensive than John Rice Plumlee. So it comes down to alternatives for me. I'd rather find other signal callers than get to Rattler. And then Legette, it's kind of the same thing. You know, you save $800 by directly pivoting from Legette to Evan Stewart. So he's not a player I'm getting a lot of, especially coming off the injury. We don't know if he's going to be limited or something. What I will say is the cheap receivers for South Carolina could be pivots off Oscar Delp and some of the other chalk. Omega Blake had 8 targets last game, full route share. Their freshman Nick Harbor had an 85% route share, only 2 targets, but 3,900, another potential pivot. What we know about South Carolina is they projected trail. They're 34th in pace, and they have a 56.5% pass rate, way over expectation. So you do have a chance to get cheap volume here. I'm sprinkling those really cheap guys as pivot off the other cheap chalk. And I guess last thing here, Mario Anderson, when this team remains competitive, his role is awesome. We've seen 2 of the last 4 games, over 20 touches. One of the games he got hurt, and the other game they got blown out. So if South Carolina keeps this closer than we think, a 4,700 Mario Anderson isn't the craziest thing.
All right. Anything else you want to add from here, or should we move on?
I think that is all. That's all the players that I have exposure to.
All right. So a less interesting game. Of all the games we talked about, I think this is going to be the one you have the least interest in. Penn State taking on Indiana. My brother, by the way, went to Indiana, so I'm very excited to look at the spread of this game and the total and let him know as soon as this show ends that his alma mater sucks at football, because Indiana today is a 31-point underdog to Penn State, and the total in the game is fairly low at 45.5 points, which indicates what to us? Indiana, the book's not expecting to score anything, basically, as far as points go. The team totally are sub 10 points for Indiana. This is a game that Penn State largely is expected to dominate based on the spread. Is that more or less how you see it, and how does that impact TFS?
I X'd out Indiana. They have a quarterback rotation. Sorsby's going to draw the start, but they've had a quick trigger to pull their quarterback, so I don't have any confidence he plays the whole game. They have 3 running backs they use. Josh Henderson's up for this game, so now it's not just Jalen Lucas and Christian Turner. They're adding Henderson back into the mix. And then their receivers are all banged up and injured. Their best receiver, Cam Camper, he hasn't been able to stay healthy and remain on the field even through full games. His route rate's at about 60% when he's suiting up. Just brutal situation for all of Indiana. Penn State, far more interesting. They're just tough to play. They've had an incredibly quick trigger on pulling Drew Aller in games where they blow teams out. So Ben Pribula has played in a lot of games this year. He's going to play today. We don't have Drew Aller projected for 100% of the snaps. Really, anytime the spread with Penn State's north of 28 points, Drew Aller's getting the axe early. So that affects the receivers. Keandre Lambert-Smith's been a baller. He's averaging 10.5 targets per game over the last 4, 8.3 on the year. So you can tell in blowouts, he's not exactly the most involved player. He's more expensive than Evan Stewart. That's just flat out not okay. And the last thing I'll say is their projections are driven by this massive team total. We've seen them play teams like UMass where they just go completely vanilla, new to their game plan. And I think that hurts the receivers. So I kind of like pivoting away from Keandre Lambert-Smith to other players in more competitive games with just as much talent. The only thing I'll say here with the running backs, you could just get crazy efficiency with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. So I am playing them. Allen's a little cheaper. It's going to be a direct 50-50 committee. I think you can sprinkle the Penn State rushers.
Do you have a preference between Allen and Singleton? Is it just Allen because he's a little bit cheaper?
Yeah, exactly. And we got a late news thing. So whenever we finish this game, can we pivot back to Oklahoma for a second?
Yeah, we could do that right now. So tell me what's going on with Oklahoma. What is the news breaking there?
So Marcus Major's not going to play in this game. It looks like he's led their team in carries 3 of the last 4 games, but he's been injured. So now it might be a 2-way committee between Tawi Walker and Gavin Sawchuk. Sawchuk is 4,400. He's another guy I think you can mix in. This Oklahoma backfield's a disaster, but it's when these guys start getting injured where we want to start mixing them in. They have a 38 team total against Kansas, who allows 4.9 yards per carry. So Sawchuk is another value play I think we could look at. Tawi Walker is back from suspension, allegedly. He's somebody we can look to as well.
Anything else that's going to be impacted by that injury situation, or just one less running back in the mix?
One less running back. I don't think we see Javonte Barnes. I haven't seen any news on him yet, but I'm anticipating this being a 2-way committee between Walker and Sawchuk today.
All right, sounds good. And yeah, whenever there's any kind of news, because you're going to know where to find that certainly a lot better than I am, just let me know, and then we could skip around to any game where the news becomes viable, because 30 minutes to go until lock. So I assume we're going to be seeing some more of those news items that come across. Next game that we have here to talk about is Duke taking on Louisville. And this is a game that doesn't have the highest total in the world. It's expected to be competitive, same as the Penn State Indiana game, though. Total 45.5 points. So like very middling total. At least the game is only expected to be decided by a touchdown. Louisville being favored by 6 points in this spot. Lower scoring game total. Is there anything of interest to you in this game with lower total, but is at least expected to be competitive, Matt?
Yeah, one-offs I think are live. Riley Leonard is expected to play tentatively, dealing with the high ankle sprain. Tried to give it a go last week, couldn't make it through the entire game. He has a monster ceiling, but you have a real risk of re-injury here, so I'm not playing Leonard. And he kind of affects the pass catchers. This is a team that changes their offense when they move to their backup. He's a freshman or a redshirt freshman, I believe, so they go run heavy. Unfortunately, that's a committee, so it's hard to play that. And then Jordan Moore, Jalen Calhoun kind of need Riley Leonard. So I don't have any Duke. Louisville has a few players just with hyper consolidated opportunity. So even in a game environment like this, we still might want to use them. Jawar Jordan's back off the hamstring injury. The guy is a monster. He's averaging 95 rush yards per game, active in the receiving game with another 25 yards per game there. And he is monster, 20 touch upside. You just hope he doesn't re-aggravate the hammy. That's at least worth mentioning. But then Jamari Thrash. They've had a bunch of blowouts, but last game, Louisville lost. He had 20 targets in one game. So you can play him as a one-off too.
Yeah, $6,100 Thrash. And looking through his game log, he has had 9 receptions, 8 receptions, 5, 4, 3, 7. And also has scored at least one touchdown all but one game this year. So it does look like he's been a pretty consistent producer for Louisville. And then from the Duke side, I assume just seems like you're not really interested in anything.
Correct.
All right, so let's move on to the next game. We have Pitt taking on Notre Dame. The total for this game, 45 points. So another game not expected to be super high scoring. And then another game also with blowout risk. We've got Notre Dame favored by nearly 3 touchdowns in this game. And Matt, how much is the potential blowout and the lower total impacting how you're approaching the Notre Dame side of the game?
Yeah, Notre Dame's tricky. Another team that just full neuters their offense. So Hartman's too expensive for me. They extend their running back rotation to about 5 guys when they blow teams out. And you can see this just in the last 2 games with Audric Estime. 22 carries in their last game, very competitive. 10 in the game prior, where they gave 12 carries to backup running backs and other ball carriers. So he's tough to get to at the price. I think he's more interesting on the FanDuel early slate. And then receiver, they just haven't found a clear wide receiver trio that they like. So they're rotating guys like Jaden Thomas had been the wide receiver 3 early this year. He's benched. They also benched Tobias Merriweather. They're starting to mix in their freshmen, Rico Flores, Jaden Greathouse. Chris Tyree is a former running back playing receiver now. And this is a great opportunity for that. You've got a 3 touchdown spread. So you probably see like 5 or 6 receivers. The only one I feel any sort of confidence in is tight end Mitch Evans. And then Pitt, man, this team is a disaster. Quarterbacks cannot be played, especially against Notre Dame's elite defense. The only player I think you can roster on Pitt is Sibo Flemister, and he's risky. They've been a committee all year, but randomly last game, they decided to axe the committee and they gave Flemister 23 carries. You're still targeting a 3 touchdown underdog with little pass game ceiling. At this point, I'd rather play an Oklahoma back. I think I'd rather play the West Virginia cheap guys. I'm going to be looking to come in underweight on Flemister and just try to get some other players in better situations with emerging roles.
Yeah, and if we go ahead and look at some of the touches per game for Flemister, it has trended up. Last 3 games, 10 carries, 13 carries. Then his peak game last week, 23 carries, like you had mentioned, 23 carries for 105 yards. Also looking through the notes. Now, Matt, I'm not a man of narratives. I'm a man of math and science, as I believe you typically are as well. But I do know that Flemister transferred from Notre Dame to Pittsburgh. So he's taking on his former team. Is there something we ever see in college football where teams are maybe more apt to give touches to players that might have transferred from a team they're playing against who they used to be at?
I don't think there's any real trends that we've seen of that. Their backup quarterback who got benched also went to Notre Dame. So there's this Pitt Notre Dame connection. And I believe one of their tight ends went to Notre Dame previously too. But yeah, these guys all suck. So even with the narrative, I don't think they're going to do anything.
We do have, I thought this was worth mentioning, Ryan Nelson in the YouTube chat. This is a quote from you, Matt. It is, college coaches and beat reporters are the worst humans. And I want to clarify.
That?
What's that?
I said that?
He said Matty G, which I assume is you. It was in quotes as well.
That sounds like something I'd say, so I can't confirm or deny. I don't remember saying it, but yeah, I probably said something like that at some point. Yeah.
I wanted to push back on that and just say, from my own experience, I don't know how it's not NBA coaches and NBA beat reporters, because the NBA, like, we just had the NBA season start. The Nets play this. I'm still tilted about this from last night, Matt, which is why I have to bring it up right now. The Nets, after their first game of the season, they did not play their core players very much. Their coach, after the game, tells the beat reporters, listen, here's what's going to happen this year. We are a team that doesn't have the most talent to win games. We have to play harder than everybody else. Therefore, our team is rarely going to have players play over 30 minutes. He said that after game 1 of the NBA season. So game 2, he plays all his starters almost the entire game. It was not anywhere near how I had it projected. And I'm very tilted, but like, you have to game 1, you have to feed me that kind of bullshit. And then game 2, just screw up all my DFS lineups and not play Day'Ron Sharpe last night. What are we doing, Brooklyn Nets? So anyway, NBA coaches, and baby, they're all dirty, filthy liars. These coaches, they it must be in their contract. They're not allowed to tell the truth. That's the only thing that I could really take away from this, because it's happened in college football. Certainly happens in NBA. And I'm tilted, fellas. Tilted for sure. And one more time, if you haven't done it, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Anything else to add from the Pitt Notre Dame game?
No, I don't play a lot of this game.
All right. The next one we have here, it is BYU at UT. And this is a game, another one, potential blowout. UT favored by 20 points. The total is 50. How wary are you of the blowout in this spot, Matt?
Pretty wary. BYU stinks. Total's low. We're seeing Texas change their signal caller, so they might even go slower, run heavier. Keaton Slovis is just not in play. He takes way too many sacks, and with the negative yards that come from them, unplayable. You would need to get salary in return to play Keaton Slovis. They returned Aiden Robbins from injury at running back, so we no longer have the LJ Martin show. That's tough. The only thing I have interest in is the cheap BYU receivers. So these are just one-offs off Oscar Delp, but Cody Epps returned in their last game, 6 targets. Route rate was awesome. He was one of the best wide receivers on the team last year, and he just hasn't played because of injury. So I'm using Epps like I'm using the South Carolina cheap guys as pivots off of Delp in tournaments.
Yeah, and I'm looking through, actually, so I'm seeing here, I'm getting to a lot of Jonathan Brooks from the Texas side, running back. We got him projected here for 25 fantasy points, Matt, so pretty healthy projection. How much of that, though, is at risk because of the blowout? Is he somebody who would be playing in the second half of the game if it ends up being very lopsided?
I think he might sit some carries in the second half of the game, but you also have, if they're up by the spread or something more, he probably has a lot to do with it. So they move from Ewers to Malik Murphy. I was incorrect on my video early this week. I thought Murphy had more rushing chops than he apparently does, but the Texas beat got in my ear, and props to this guy, man. Looking at Malik Murphy high school tape, but doesn't have as much rushing equity as I thought. So learn that. Looking at a pure pocket passer against BYU in a situation where maybe they increase their run rate just with a redshirt freshman signal caller and a matchup advantage on the ground that they should have no problem exploiting. So even in a blowout, you might have outs for Brooks still. I think he's still an amazing play. Efficiency will be there. Their run rate just might flat out increase a lot with Malik Murphy under center. And you don't have a dual threat quarterback to siphon off that work. If anything, the blowout might help a guy like CJ Baxter. We've seen this with, Jordan James in Oregon, where these guys get extra work in the second half of games. Baxter has a 15 carry game within the last 4. He's a freshman himself. They'll definitely want to get him some work if this blows out. Again, I think there's other players we can get to in this price range that are safer. The OU backs now, West Virginia situation. But yeah, I mean, you could probably play Murphy in tournaments just because if the pass rate remains the same, BYU is going to get crushed. And Murphy is an awesome recruit. We just haven't seen him. He's throwing to amazing receivers. So it's kind of like McCord stepping in at Ohio State. Like, how good do you really have to be when you're throwing to Marvin Harrison and Ibuka? Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Jatavian Sanders, they're all awesome players. None of them project that well in this game because of the low total and changing offense. But yeah, for tournaments, we just don't know. We've never seen it.
Yeah, and anything else from this game that's really standing out to you?
Not really. Brooks is an awesome play for good reason, but he might be the most owned player on the slate. So I would just say navigate him carefully. If you're loading up on that chalk, which I think is fine, make sure you're just looking at something else to maybe get a leverage point in your lineups.
Yeah, and we've got a comment in the YouTube chat from Greg Bianco who's saying, love it. Looking at the high school tape, the grind is real. Nobody grinds harder than Matt Gajewski. I've said this before. There's nobody that I know that's more knowledgeable on football, and it doesn't start with high school. I've seen Matt with a pen and notepad at Pee Wee football games. He's taking notes on like 8-year-olds, and he's making sure that when these guys make it to high school, make it to college, that he's well ahead of the curve. That's why our college football projections are the best out there, and why guys should sign up using that link below, because Matt is putting the work in from the time these kids are like 8, 6 years old. He's interviewing women when they're pregnant. He's asking them like, hey, like, what is your husband's 40 time? Just, he wants to know the genetics. And that's really the kind of legwork that goes into our college football projections. Moving on. Next game that we have here is Oregon taking on Utah. And when running lineups for myself personally, Matt, not really getting to a lot of exposure to this game outside of Jaquindon Jackson. He is somebody who I'm getting to a handful of lineups at the running back position. So what do you make of Jackson in this spot? Do you think that he is somebody we should be getting a good amount of exposure to?
Yeah, I like Jackson, and I actually do like Pee Wee football. I've probably been to 15 high school games over the last 2 years. My roommate's a coach, so that's been nice. Get to see these kids in Wisconsin. This game, I think Jackson, awesome play. Utah has a 37% pass rate. Jackson, he was injured to begin the year, so the opportunity overall doesn't look great, but now that he's back and he's healthy, the guy's carried at least 22 times in the last 2 games, just a monster workload. His route rate is also 60%. We haven't seen Utah trailing much, but in the event they do, his route rate holds up. He should be involved in all game environments. Matchup's not good. It's definitely tough. Oregon plays good defense. But Jackson, he's the only piece I'll play on Utah with that pass game that's just been a flat-out disaster. This game is interesting, though. I think for tournaments, you can still play the Oregon side. Utah's had a pretty easy schedule, and they've actually been very fortunate. If you go back and just look at post-game win expectancy, this team should probably be like 3-3. So seeing game day here and stuff is a bit of a joke. But I think that gives some untapped potential to this Oregon offense, which is explosive and could just flat out run up the score on Utah. I bet Oregon laid the points at 6.5. And Bo Nix, we know the ceiling is there. It's just a price point thing with him. He's in the same range as Dylan Gabriel, who's in a far better game environment. But you don't get any Bo Nix if you run lineups. You know, if you just go straight projections into Fantasy Cruncher, he's not coming up at all, which makes me really interested in like a contrarian Bo Nix. He's a good rusher. He's averaging 291 through the air, has one of the best receivers in the country in Troy Franklin. The cheaper receivers are fine. Even Terrence Ferguson's now up to like a 70% route share over the last couple games. You can definitely play these Oregon guys. And that's also works for Bucky Irving. Had the injury scare last game, but probable tag, he's going to play here. He's averaging 95 rush yards per game. The pass game role is absurd, too. 4.3 targets for Bucky Irving. And he played half the year with Noah Whittington, who's now out for the season. This guy's a wagon of epic proportions. I'm not scared of Utah's defense whatsoever. So seeing like unowned Oregon, really, really interesting to me. And the best thing about it is if you're running 150 lineups, it's not like you need to take a major stand. You can sprinkle Nix, Irving, Troy Franklin, and you're going to be over the field. These guys are likely to come in somewhere around 5 to 10% owned.
All right. Yeah. So it's funny. Like when I was looking at my lineups and just a little behind the scenes, what I've been doing here to kind of give myself a baseline of the questions I ask Matt is I've run lineups with his projections. I see which players it is that I get the most exposure to. And I didn't realize that based on what you just said, I was actually overweight here on guys like Irving and Franklin because getting to them in like 7-8% of lineups, apparently that is overweight to what the field is doing, making them look like guys who are pretty good tourney plays. And a question here in Discord for you, Matt, from GG123. He wants to know, in the flex spot, do you prefer Jace or Triple J?
Jace, I think, is the Kansas State receiver. JJJ is the West Virginia running back, right? So you don't know this, sure, Craig, but sometimes we get questions in chat and it'll be like, can we play Anderson or Smith? And maybe my kryptonite on these shows is not knowing these players unless I get first name and last name. So if whoever had that question in Discord, please say the full names and I'll be able to answer it.
All right. I see him typing right now.
Okay, so good. This is just a personal problem. So my apologies.
No, it's the same for me. I see it on basketball shows where people will be like, hey, do I want to play Smith or Johnson today? And it's tough. There's a handful of them. So We have, let's see. Yeah, just type out GG123. Do me a favor, just type out the 1v1 you have, first name, last name of the player for each of them, and then I'll be able to respond. And here we go. It is Jace Brown, and then he says JJJ from WVU.
Okay, so yeah, that's what I thought it was. Wasn't sure. I prefer West Virginia side.
All right. West Virginia side, it is GG123. Thank you for the question. If anybody else has questions in our Discord, at me, we could answer those. And I'll do the best I can to really the info to Matt. I failed on that account. I didn't do the best.
You didn't fail. This was a personal failure on my part.
Well, it's failure on my part too, because I'm reading the stuff and trying to pass it on to you. We got another question here from Ben P34. Ben says, what do Florida State's wide receiver projections look like with Johnny Wilson out? So going back to Florida State, what do you like prioritizing from them with Johnny Wilson being out?
Yeah, I mainly just got Keon Coleman and Jaheim Bell. So there's a couple cheap guys out for this team too. Like it looks like Destin Hill's not going to play. But the problem is they use so many of them. So it's not even just like, all right, now we have Johnny Wilson out. This is fine. Even with the extra guys out, one of the things Florida State has done is use more than one tight end. So you've got Marqueston Douglas, you've got Morlock. You've got, here are the receivers that have played considerably for this team recently. Destin Hill, he's not expected to play. Darian Williamson, Hakeem Williams, also not expected to play. Deuce Spahn, Ja'Kai Douglas, Preston Daniel, an extra tight end, Kentron Poitier. Vandrevius Jacobs has played some this year. Like even with 2 or 3 receivers out, the only players that have locked in roles are Keon Coleman and Jaheim Bell.
All right, couple more questions coming in. GG, I do see your follow-up question there. So we'll answer that in a second. By the way, don't, because he's apologizing now for spam. No. Ask as many questions as you want. No issue at all whatsoever. But some questions here that we have was a follow-up from GG123. He said, Travis Bell and then JJJ from WVU on one side, or the other side is a naked green Moss and Epps. Do you have a lean on either of those 3v3s?
The first side, the Travis side.
All right, GG. We're going with the first side there. And then we have a question from AJ Pineridge. AJ wants to know, for a DKGPP, Thrash or Nick Anderson? Which way do you lean?
Tournament specifically, if it's large enough, I'd play Thrash, but Anderson's the straight up better play. I think this depends on how large your field is. The larger, the more interest in Thrash I have.
And then one final question here from Zach Attack. Zach Attack wants to know, do we like double stacking with Walker and McCollum on FanDuel?
Oh, yeah. So on FanDuel, that game is an awesome game. That's North Carolina. Walker's exceedingly expensive, but the good thing about that is they did not price up Nate McCollum, who's not seen a role reduction even with Walker back. That's a sick double stack.
All right, and now getting into the next game, and then 2 more games left to talk about, and then we'll circle back and see if there's any final questions from you guys that we could hit on right before lock. But looking at the next game, we have Georgia taking on Florida. Oscar Delp looks like he's going to be a pretty popular value option. I've seen a couple people bring his name up in the Discord chat. I've seen people bring him up in YouTube. He's somebody who made it into about a quarter of my lineups. $3,400 Oscar Delp. How important is he as a value option on this slate to you, Matt?
He's the best value, but there are alternatives. We've mentioned a lot of them already. For cash games, I would just play him. For tournaments, that's where you could maybe look elsewhere. The holes you'd poke, he is a sophomore. He hasn't played a ton in his career. The game environment's not good. It's a 49 total. Georgia's still favored. So their implied team total of 31.5 is above average, but still largely middling on this slate. They have amazing receivers. So you're kind of betting on him walking into, I don't know, maybe 50 to 75% of the Brock Bowers role, which I think is likely, which is why he comes up as the best value, but it's not guaranteed. Maybe they just go full 3-4 wide receiver sets. They have amazing receivers. Ladd McConkey's now had to buy to get healthy. Dominic Lovett is a premier Missouri transfer. Ra Thomas, premier Mississippi State transfer. Marcus Rosemy-Jackson's been productive. They have an electric running game. Kendall Milton's expected to suit up with DeJuan Edwards. So there's holes to be poked, but at the same time, Brock Bowers had a 30% route rate last game. That was because of injury. Delp was at 75%. The guy is a 5-star sophomore tight end. The talent is there. You just have to decide for yourself how much these things matter, how large your tournament is. If you'd rather get to like a Cody Epps or something like that as a pivot, or if it's small enough, I would recommend just eating this chalk.
Yeah, and 3,400, like Matt said, one of the best value plays on the slate. If you're playing cash, fair to say you're just playing to open cash games.
Correct.
Anything else from this game that really stands out to you? There's some other guys I'm getting to, like I have some Carson Beck to Oscar Delp stacks, but it's not all that much. I'm getting to a limited amount of Delp, and then other guys that are making this some lineups for me, like Eugene Wilson and Trevor Etienne, but nothing really all that significant. Outside of tournament darts, is there anything that stands out to you beyond Delp?
Not really. Beck's a pretty good tournament play, averaging 308 yards per game. He always has that ceiling. Doesn't run a ton, so he's required to get a 300-yard bonus at this price. But I think there's some risk with DeJuan Edwards. He's had these monster carry games, but they've all come when Kendall Milton's been out or limited. Milton's now off the bye and expected to play in this game. They've just run 50-50 when he's been fully healthy. I do think Lovett, Ra Thomas, Ladd McConkey are interesting darts. They're entirely unowned. They're awesome players. They're just kind of log jammed at Georgia, who blows teams out every week and pulls their starters. One-offs and tournaments, don't hate that. But yeah, you mentioned a couple of the volume guys on Florida. Trevor Etienne is just a price play at 4,900. I would rather pivot down to some of the value that's opened up over him at this point. But yeah, Eugene Wilson, he's back from injury, back-to-back 9-target games. You could do worse than that. They're going to be throwing constantly, but worried about just upside.
Evan8401 has left us a question in Discord, and he is asking for a FanDuel GPP, Le'Veon Moss and Nate McCullum, or Sawchuck and Evan Stewart. Which side of that do you lean towards, Matt?
The McCullum side.
Yeah, McCullum and Le'Veon Moss. I have a ton of Moss in my lineup, so for me, unless it was like some like crazy difference in general, if any question was asked to me, not that you guys should care all that much about my opinion, you should value Matt's a lot more heavily, but Le'Veon Moss in any sort of like 1v1, 2v2, he's probably going to end up being the answer for me. One more game to hit on here, and then we'll check to make sure that there aren't any questions from you guys that we missed out on. But final game of the slate, USC at Cal. It is a 66.5-point total. Caleb Williams, who just a couple of weeks ago was the betting favorite to win the Heisman, and things have kind of come unraveled a little bit for USC here, Matt. And Caleb Williams nowhere near the top of the Heisman betting odds anymore. For DFS, he's still very expensive, $10,005 on DraftKings. Are you liking him to bounce back this week? And how are you viewing him as a play as a very expensive QB?
Yeah, really expensive. I'd rather go down to Gabriel straight up, but for tournaments, I think we need to consider him. We mentioned a slew of value options that you could use to get to him. Ceiling is enormous. The game total is 67 points that tops the slate. Cal's defense is allowing 8.6 yards per pass. They're an awful defense. Matchup couldn't be a better get-right spot for him. And he's also gotten easier to stack. They've benched Mario Williams. Dorian Singer's a part-time player. All that has helped Brendan Rice and Taj Washington, who are middling in terms of price, maybe a little expensive for this slate, but still not prohibitive. You can play these guys. Michael Jackson would be your value at 3,100. He has 9 targets over the last 2 games. Zachariah Branch is a guy seeing more role as their 5-star freshman. So you can play Caleb Williams. I don't hate him. I think he's actually pretty interesting for tournaments with so much projected to come in on Gabriel. The backfield's a committee, so I don't have a ton of interest there. And then on the Cal side, I mean, this USC defense is the gift that keeps on giving. Fernando Mendoza, one of the higher recruits in program history for Cal, 4-star freshman quarterback. His stats have been limited due to injury, but he's going to start here and presumably play the whole game unless he gets knocked out again. Awesome matchup. So Mendoza, although we don't know much, this defense has been giving to far inferior signal callers. Cal also is fast. They're 11th in pace. They pass a fair amount. So Jeremiah Hunter and Taj Davis really stand out as value plays. Davis comes up quite a bit. He has 19 targets over the last 2 games. I still think it's fair to find the salary to get up to Hunter, who was their wide receiver 1 last year, and still has an edge in receiving yards and targets on the year. I think we see some normalization over the coming weeks. So I'll play both of them, and I think Mendoza's fine.
So we've got some people melting down in the chat. Well, maybe melting down isn't the right word, but people up in arms trying to figure out what's going on. Le'Veon Moss. There was one tweet that I did see. Matt Butler added you on Twitter. So apparently at Texas AGS on Twitter was saying that Le'Veon Moss is currently not on the field. Is this something that is of concern to you? A few minutes to go into the lock here.
Yeah, I mean, you can't play him then. Well, let's take a look at my good old handy Twitter list. This is awesome news to get 5 minutes before lock. Yeah, I mean, if you guys have this information, definitely don't play him. I don't know yet.
Yeah, so I am looking through Twitter. I will say there was only one account, and like I don't know what are considered reputable college football sources, but one person was saying he's not on the field from 20 minutes ago. But I haven't seen anything from like an actual beat reporter or anybody who's given actual information on Moss. When does that game lock, by the way?
I don't know.
Let's see. The Moss game locks the A&M game in 4 minutes. Well, that's fun.
Well, yeah, I don't know.
What are you going to do with this situation? You going to ride with them? Are you going to pivot? Are you going to lower exposure? And how often is it in college football that you get erroneous or half reports 4 minutes before a game starts?
Sometimes, I mean, I don't know. Texas A&M has a good reporter. So, like, I'm a little surprised this hasn't come up now. Like, they normally, I tend to think he's playing. So we've had really good reporting on like Evan Stewart and stuff in the past. So I don't know. I legitimately don't know, guys. I'm sorry.
All right. So, and I don't know either. I do see that Matt Butler, I see the tweets that you've included to me there, but also it doesn't say that he's out. It just says that he wasn't on the field. And that was from 25 minutes ago. So there hasn't been any follow-up since then. So it's hard to say.
He's day-to-day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right.
I might just X him.
Yeah, fun times in the worlds of college football DFS, and I will say that is the only account that I've seen say anything. I'm looking up Le'Veon Moss on Twitter, and I don't see anything else. Nor do I see that he's confirmed out anywhere.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm just gonna get my CSV ready. I don't know. It's so tough without it being confirmed because he's legitimately probably the best play on the slate.
Anything else you want to add from USC Cal?
No, play that game in tournaments. It's awesome.
All right. So going to go back into the Discord channel, and doesn't look like we have any other questions in there. I want to tell you guys about one more thing before we head out of here. Bet365. If you guys haven't signed up at Bet365, you're losing out on an opportunity to pad your wallet with some free money, because at Bet365, they have a deal going right now where when you sign up using the link we have below, you bet $1. Just $1 over at Bet365, and you get $150 in bonus bets. And if you live in Kentucky, because Kentucky a little bit newer to the sports betting space and them trying to get new people in the door there, at Bet365, if you were living in Kentucky, bet $1, you get $365 in bonus bets. So the states that Bet365 is currently operating in: Kentucky, Ohio, New Jersey, Virginia, Iowa, Colorado. If you haven't signed up at Bet365, take advantage now. They're giving you money, and it's something that you don't want to pass up on. It's one of the easiest ways to build your bankroll in the sports betting DFS space, just taking advantage of these new customer offers. And this is one that probably isn't going to be around for very long, so take advantage of it while it exists. If you're anybody you know has a gambling problem, call or text the number 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, Matt, we are approaching lock here. We got only a few seconds left to go. If you guys haven't done it, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And any final thoughts on the slate?
I'm leaving Moss in.
All right. Letting it ride.
I mean, so the Texas A&M beat is good. He's tweeted everybody else that's not dressed. Why would he leave out Moss?
And also, I'm gonna reiterate that, and not that either Matt or I are fully 100% confident what's going on here, but it's only one person who didn't even say that Moss out. He just said that he wasn't on the field, and that was 30 minutes before the game. He didn't. It's not like there was a follow-up saying he still wasn't on the field or that he hadn't come onto the field afterwards. So a little bit of a murky situation. We are now at lock, and Matt ultimately ended up leaving him in. So we'll see what ends up happening, whether he plays or doesn't play. That'll be the sweat. It'll be like my Dayron Sharp sweat last night, where I was like, is he actually going to play?
41%. So this could be awesome or catastrophically bad.
All right, guys, go ahead, check the games out. And yeah, college football. This was my first time on the show. Thank you guys very much for sticking around and watching. Ben is going to be back next week, so you guys will be back in good hands with him. Thank you guys once again very much. Good luck with all your lineups and have a good weekend.